Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. A few months ago I did a video that posed the question, is Harley Davidson a luxury brand? And I did that video in response to CEO Jochen Zeitz stating at one of their quarterly earnings calls that he wanted to see Harley Davidson become a luxury brand. Well, if you've noticed the title of this video, I don't think they ever will be a luxury brand, but I wish they would try, and I'll explain this. At the recent Q2 2021 earnings call, I did a video about this, and one of the more interesting things that came up was when an analyst asked about dealers charging over MSRP for bikes. And Jochen Zeitz indicated that that wasn't really happening too much, and it wasn't really significant, just kind of wishy-washy statement. But I think that single issue is going to be the greatest impediment to Harley Davidson ever being perceived or becoming a luxury brand. And I'll explain this. So let's take Rolex. Rolex watches. Most people would agree they're a luxury brand. Their numbers are kind of hard to come by on production, but it's pretty commonly accepted that they make about 800,000 watches a year for sale worldwide. Similar sized company, about 4,000 people. Harley Davidson has a little over 4,000 now. Total revenue of around 5 billion. Pretty comparable. If you look at the range in prices, Rolexes typically go from around $8,000 to $80,000. I'd say the median price for a Rolex at a dealership is around, say, 15 to 18,000. I think they sell far more of the stainless steel models than the gold and diamond or platinum ones. So I think it's pretty comparable to Harley Davidson. Obviously, they have motorcycles with MSRP of around $10,000 right now, and you can go up to pushing $50,000 with a CVO Tri-Glide. And let's look at a couple other examples. Ford Motor Company, they have their GT car, very exclusive vehicle. Then you have Ducati. They're really considered a premium brand, and they've released some specialty models here recently that are pretty interesting what they've done in the resale market. But as an example of Harley Davidson dealerships, in some cases, selling over MSRP, the dealer closest to me sells a Street Bob 114 with an MSRP of $15,000 for $5,000 over it at $20,000. They've got a couple of CVOs, a Street Glide CVO and a Road Glide CVO. Those retail for around $43,000. They're trying to sell theirs for $60-some thousand, so about $20,000 over MSRP. Needless to say, that doesn't impress a lot of customers. I mean, there's people with the money. I mean, I believe it or not, I think there's people that don't even look up the MSRP when they go into a Harley dealership. They may be the minority, but they're out there. So let's take a specialty motorcycle edition that Harley Davidson just came out with, and that's their Electric Glide Revival. I think it's a beautiful bike. It's fantastic. Production was limited to 1,500 units. By and large, this bike has sold out. There's still a few out there. MSRP just under $32,000. But you know, it's a great bike, but there's really nothing special about it in terms of performance. Certainly the styling is unique. It goes back to a 1969 Electric Glide, but has all the modern amenities. I think I would have called it a retro glide myself, but Harley announced that they'll be coming out with one revival model each year, and production likewise will be limited to 1,500 units. But one indication of how sought after a model is how it's doing in the secondary market. And not a lot of information out there. I mean, almost all the bikes listed on Cycle Trader for this Electric Glide Revival are new bikes. There's a Harley dealership trying to sell it for $40,000. Who knows what additional fees they're going to tack on. But then it drops off pretty quickly to having dealerships selling it at MSRP. Laidlaws in Southern California has their Electric Glide Revival listed at MSRP. And then you have a used one listed on Cycle Trader from a private seller with about 1,200 miles on it, that's a couple $1,000s under MSRP. So if you look at 1,500 units, and let's assume that Harley's going to produce more bikes than they did in 2020. Let's say they're going to produce around 200,000 bikes. So at 1,500 total Electric Glide Revivals sold out of their 200,000 production, that's less than 1% of the total production. Now let's look at a similar special edition, but this one from Ducati. Ducati came out with their Diavolo Lamborghini. They announced it at the end of 2020. It's a 2021 model. Performance-wise, engine-wise, suspension-wise, it's the same as a normal 1260 Diavolo, but it's got loads of carbon fiber, a different exhaust, a color match paint that matches the Lamborghini Sian FKP37, which is a, you want to call it a supercar or even a hypercar. It's over 800 horsepower, V12 with an electric hybrid drivetrain. They only produced 63 of the Sian automobile, and those go for about $2.6 million a pop. So the 63 is significant because that's the year Lamborghini got started. Ducati, for their part, added a 0 to the 63, and they're going to produce a total of 630 of the Diavolo Lamborghinis. I mean, it's a beautiful bike. So that bike went on sale. They were pretty well snapped up rather quickly. If you go out on Cycle Trader, there appears to be a couple of dealerships out there still that have them in stock, and the listed price is at MSRP. I talked to a dealer near me, a Ducati dealer, and they indicated that they had ordered one for a customer, and this customer was in good standing with Ducati because they had also purchased other high-end Ducatis like a Superleggera, which is a $100,000 bike. So we'll come back to that theme of rewarding customers who have been loyal or have stepped up to the plate and bought other products from that manufacturer in the past. So if you look at Ducati's annual production of around 53,000 motorcycles, if they limit the Diavolo Lamborghini to 630 copies, that's a higher percentage of their total production than the Harley Davidson Electric Glide Revival. So as I said, you can still see some dealers listing it for their $32,000 MRP, which is about $8,000 over the MSRP of a normal Ducati Diavolo 1260. But there's not many out there. And then you go to people that are reselling them. Here's somebody selling a pre-owned or used Lamborghini Diavolo for $130,000. There's another one listed through DuPont Registry at over $200,000. Now, that's some multiple. That's probably 3 to 5 times over the MSRP for this motorcycle. Is anyone selling the Electric Glide Revival for even 2 times MSRP? No. The one example that we have of the used Electric Glide Revival, it's actually selling for a couple $1,000s under MSRP with only 1,200 miles on it. Now, as I said, I'm not a big fan of dealers selling well above MSRP or over MSRP at all. And there's a lot of parallels with what's going on in the car and motorcycle world and the luxury watch world. Let's take Rolex as an example. One of their popular models is the Daytona, the Rolex Daytona. It's a chronograph. The watch has an MSRP of $13,500 roughly. But guess what? You're never going to be able to go into a Rolex authorized dealership and actually find one of these in the display case. The so-called shortage of Rolex watches actually predates the pandemic. It started back in roughly 2018 with the popularity of what they call their sport watches, which are watches with a stainless steel case and band. People started buying those up like crazy. And as a result, the dealers get their allocation of watches and they're basically sold. They don't even put them in the display case. They have a list of customers who are looking for that watch, and you can imagine they prioritize the list based on how good a customer they've been in the past. What watches have they bought in the past? How much have they spent, and so on. Rolex dealers are not allowed to sell a watch over MSRP, and they're not allowed to sell a watch on the internet. So when they get a watch, they're going to sell them all, and so they're happy to that extent. But they also see a lot of disappointed would-be customers who come in and see a pretty much empty display case. And this has been going on for at least 3 years now. Some people accuse Rolex of playing games by artificially limiting production. Harley Davidson did that on purpose right before the pandemic. They said they were going to cut production. They're trying to drive up the price of used bikes, and they wanted to end discounting of new bikes. In other words, they wanted to sell at MSRP. Now, the interesting thing about Rolex is they don't sell t-shirts, they don't sell apparel. They sell new watches through authorized dealers, and they also do repair work. That's where they make their money. If you go in and you want to finance the purchase of a Rolex, the financing is going to be arranged through the dealership. It's not arranged through Rolex. So Rolex has taken a lot of action to curtail or discourage the secondary market, because what's happening is, you want a Rolex Daytona as an example. You can't find one. It could be years before somebody's going to call you up from a dealership and say, come on in, we got one for you. So what do people do? They turn to the secondary market. You can buy a Rolex Daytona. They're going for over $36,000 right now. And so what some people are doing is they'll be on the list, they'll get a watch at an authorized dealer, and then they'll sell it to one of these internet resellers. Now, Rolex supposedly is trying to discourage this practice. If they find out a person's done that, they'll ban them from buying any more watches, and they may even not do any warranty work on any existing watches they may own. So it's a pretty tough enforcement that's rumored to be in place. But the bottom line is, it's really propped up the price of used Rolexes, and it's protected the value of people who have bought Rolexes and want to keep them. Now, there's people who buy Rolexes that wear them regularly. There's people who buy them that want to flip them for a profit. There's people who see them as an investment and just hang on to them and hope to sell them at some point in the future for a profit. And then there are people that collect them for whatever objective they have in their collection. Maybe they want certain Rolexes, certain movements. Interesting thing about Rolex is they change their models very incrementally over the years. There's no big splashy new model that they come out with. So it helps them in that they're propping up the price of used Rolexes. They've created a huge demand for their product. They can sell every single watch they make in a given year. And it's also boosted the sale of the higher end Rolex watches, like the ones with the gold cases and the gemstones and the diamond paid faces. So people come in, the stainless steel watches, sports watches are gone. They could go onto a secondary market and pay 2 to 3 times MSRP, or they can find one for MSRP, and they may spend more money, but they're getting a lot more watch in terms of precious metals and things like that. So the value, or the perceived value, of the higher end range of the Rolex product line increases. So it just is a win-win for Rolex. The only real negative is they're missing out on a lot of potential future customers who may just turn to another brand or just buy some other type of luxury product. Now let's take the example of 4GT. It's very similar to what the situation is for Rolex. These 4GTs, if they're relatively new, after a couple of years, are selling for over $1 million. But Ford sells them directly to the consumer, well, through an authorized dealer is where they take delivery, but they sell for about $500,000. So you ask yourself, well, if the cars are worth over $1 million, why is Ford only selling them for $500,000? And to me, it's because a lot more people would aspire to own a Ford GT if it's $500,000. Whereas if it was $1 million plus, a lot of people would just say, oh, it's unattainable and move on to something else. They wouldn't aspire to own that. In fact, if somebody wants to buy a Ford GT, they have to go through a pretty lengthy application process. They have to agree to not sell it within 2 years of purchase. Apparently, John Cena reneged on that agreement and sold a Ford GT that he bought through Ford within months for a sizable profit. And then Ford sued him and won. And they won some undisclosed amount of money and then donated those proceeds to charity. So if Rolex and Ford with their GT and Ducati through their Diavo Lamborghini can sell high-end products, high in demand for MSRP through their dealerships, Harley clearly could too. They could control their dealers if they wanted to. Now, there are some games with some auto manufacturers. Let's say Ferrari. Ferrari doesn't allow dealers to sell over MSRP, but supposedly what happens is a dealer will get a vehicle in, make arrangements with some individual who buys it, and then sells it right back to the dealership, and suddenly it's a used vehicle, and then they can sell that for well over MSRP. I mean, I've heard of that with Porsche too. Porsche is another company that doesn't. I don't think they really let their dealers sell over MSRP directly, but there seems to be a lot of certified pre-owns with 200 miles out there on the odometer for sale through various Porsche dealerships. So I think the bottom line is Harley Davidson could rein these dealers in who sell over MSRP, but they don't want to. You know, it benefits Harley because 2/3 of the Harleys sold at a dealership are financed through Harley. So the bigger the amount, the more money they're making. They're still selling bikes, but I think it's going to hurt them in the long run. And I think it's going to cause fewer people to aspire to own a Harley Davidson if these prices keep getting out of hand. I know I have a pretty long memory, and if I've got a local dealer, I've had other issues with them, believe me, but if I know of a local or any dealer who routinely sells well above MSRP, I'm never going to buy a bike from them. I mean, why would I? So let me know your thoughts about this. I'd be curious what you think. Uh, you might ask, well, how could Harley control that? They're independent dealers. They can. If they don't have it in their franchise agreements, I guarantee you they could get these dealerships in line by messing with their allocation, cutting back the number of bikes that are delivered to the dealership, or changing up the mix, maybe leaving them with less desirable bikes, less popular bikes to sell. They could get these dealers in line very quickly if they wanted to, but they don't. So please let me know your thoughts about this, and look forward to future videos. Thanks very much.